Aesop's Fables. Translation by V.S. Vernon Jones. Volume 1. The Spendthrift and the Swallow. A spendthrift who wasted his fortune and had nothing left but the clothes in which he stood, saw a swallow one fine day in early spring. Thinking that summer had come, and that he could now do without his coat, he went and sold it for what it would fetch. A change, however, took place in the weather, and there came a sharp frost which killed the unfortunate swallow. When the spendthrift saw its dead body, he cried, "Miserable bird! Thanks to you, I am perishing of cold myself." One swallow does not make summer. The Old Woman and the Doctor. An old woman nearly fell blind from a disease of the eyes, and after consulting a doctor, made an agreement with him in the presence of witnesses that she should pay him a high fee if he cured her, while if he failed, he was to receive nothing. The doctor, accordingly, prescribed a course of treatment, and every time he paid her a visit, he took away some article out of the house, until at last, when he visited her for the last time, and the cure was complete, there was nothing left. When the old woman saw that the house was empty, she refused to pay him his fee, and, after repeated refusals on her part, he sued her before the magistrates for payment of her debt. On being brought into court, she was ready with her defense. "The claimant," said she, "has stated the facts about our agreement correctly. I undertook to pay him a fee if he cured me, and he, on his part, promised to charge nothing if he failed. Now, he says I am cured, but I say that I am blinder than ever, and I can prove what I say. When my eyes were bad, I could, at any rate, see well enough to be aware that my house contained a certain amount of furniture and other things. But now, when according to him I am cured, I am entirely unable to see anything at all." Those who play tricks must be prepared to take jokes. The Moon and Her Mother. The Moon once begged her mother to make her a gown. "How can I?" replied she. "There's no fitting your figure. At one time you're a new moon, and at another you're a full moon, and between whiles you're neither one nor the other. Know thyself, and seek what is possible." Mercury and the Woodman. A woodman was felling a tree on the bank of a river when his axe, glancing off the trunk, flew out of his hands and fell into the water. As he stood by the water's edge, lamenting his loss, Mercury appeared and asked him the reason for his grief. Upon learning what happened, and out of pity for his distress, Mercury dived into the river and, bringing up a golden axe, asked him if that was the one he had lost. The woodman replied that it was not, and Mercury then dived a second time, and bringing up a silver axe, asked if this was his. "No, that's not mine either," said the woodman. Once more, Mercury dived into the river and brought up the missing axe. The woodman was overjoyed at the recovery of his property and thanked his benefactor warmly, and the latter was so pleased with his honesty that he made him a present of the other two axes. When the woodman told the story to his companions, one was filled with envy at his good fortune and determined to try his own luck. So, he went and began to fell a tree at the edge of the river, and presently contrived to let his axe drop into the water. Mercury appeared as before, and, on learning that his axe had fallen in, he dived and brought up a golden axe, as he had done on the previous occasion. Without waiting to be asked whether it was his or not, the fellow cried, "That's mine!" and stretched out his hand eagerly for the prize. But Mercury was so disgusted at his dishonesty that he not only declined to give him the golden axe, but also refused to recover for him the one he had let fall into the stream. Honesty is the best policy. The Ass, the Fox, and the Lion. An ass and a fox went into partnership and sallied out to forage for food together. They hadn't gone far before they saw a lion coming their way, at which they were both dreadfully frightened. But the fox thought he saw a way of saving his own skin, and went boldly up to the lion and whispered in his ear, "I'll manage that you shall get hold of the ass without trouble of stalking him, if you'll promise to let me go free." The lion agreed to this, and the fox then rejoined his companion, and contrived before long to lead him by a hidden pit, which some hunter had dug up as a trap for wild animals, and into which he fell. When the lion saw that the ass was safely caught and couldn't get away, it was to the fox that he first turned his attention, soon finishing him off. Then, at his leisure, proceeded to feast upon the ass. Betray a friend, and you'll often find you have ruined yourself. The Lion and the Mouse. A lion, asleep in his lair, awoke to a mouse running over his face. Losing his temper, he seized it with his paw and was about to kill it. The mouse, terrified, piteously entreated him to spare its life. "Please let me go," it cried, "and one day I will repay you for your kindness." The idea of so insignificant a creature ever being able to do anything for him amused the lion so much that he laughed aloud and in good humor let it go. But the mouse's chance came after all. One day, the lion got entangled in a net which had been spread for game by some hunters. The mouse heard and recognized his roars of anger and ran to the spot. Without more ado, it set to work, gnawing the ropes with its teeth, and succeeded before long in setting the lion free. "There," said the mouse. "You laughed at me when I promised I would repay you, but now you see, even a mouse can help a lion." An act of kindness is never wasted. The Crow and the Pitcher. A thirsty crow found a pitcher with some water in it, but so little was there that, try as she might, she could not reach it with her beak, and it seemed as though she would die of thirst within sight of the remedy. At last, she hit upon a clever plan. She began dropping pebbles into the pitcher, and with each pebble the water rose a little higher, until at last it reached the brim. Thus, the knowing bird was enabled to quench her thirst. Necessity is the mother of invention. The Boys and the Frogs. Some mischievous boys were playing on the edge of a pond, and, catching sight of some frogs swimming about in the shallow water, began to amuse themselves by pelting them with stones, killing several of them. At last, one of the frogs put his head out of the water and said, "Oh, stop, stop, I beg you! What is sport to you is death to us." Consider whether your fun brings unhappiness to others. The North Wind and the Sun. A dispute arose between the North Wind and the Sun, each claiming that he was stronger than the other. At last, they agreed to try their powers upon a traveler to see which could soonest strip him of his cloak. The North Wind had the first try, and, gathering up all his force for the attack, he came whirling furiously down upon the man and caught up his cloak as though he would wrest it from him by one single effort. But the harder he blew, the more closely the man wrapped the cloak around himself. Then came the turn of the Sun. At first, he beamed gently upon the traveler, who soon unclasped his cloak and walked on with it hanging loosely about his shoulders. Then the Sun shone forth in his full strength, and the man, before he had gone many steps, was glad to throw his cloak right off and complete his journey more lightly clad. Persuasion is better than force. The Mistress and Her Servants. A widow, thrifty and industrious, had 2 servants whom she kept hard at work. They were not allowed to lie long abed in the mornings, since the old lady had them up and doing as soon as the rooster crowed. They disliked intensely having to get up at such an hour, especially in wintertime, and thought that if it were not for the rooster waking up the mistress so horribly early, they could sleep longer. So, they caught it and wrung its neck. But they weren't prepared for the consequences, for what happened was that their mistress, not hearing the rooster crow as usual, woke them up earlier than ever and set them to work in the middle of the night. Be careful what you wish for. The Goods and the Ills. There was a time in the youth of the world when goods and ills entered equally into the concerns of men, so that the goods did not prevail to make them altogether blessed, nor the ills to make them wholly miserable. But, owing to the foolishness of mankind, the ills multiplied greatly in number and increased in strength, until it seemed as though they would deprive the goods of all share in human affairs and banish them from the earth. The latter, therefore, betook themselves to heaven and complained to Jupiter of the treatment they had received, at the same time praying him to grant them protection from the ills, and to advise them concerning the matter of their dealings with men. Jupiter granted their request for protection, and decreed that for the future they should not go among men openly in a body, and so be liable to attack from the hostile ills, but singly and unobserved, and at infrequent and unexpected intervals. Hence it is that the earth is full of ills, for they come and go as they please and are never far away, while goods, alas, come one by one only, and have to travel all the way from heaven, so that they are very seldom seen. Appreciate the good, for it appears less often than an ill. The Hares and the Frogs. The hares once gathered together and lamented the unhappiness of their lot, exposed as they were to dangers on all sides and lacking the strength and the courage to hold their own. Men, dogs, birds, and beasts of prey were all their enemies, killing and devouring them daily. Sooner than endure such persecution any longer, they one and all determined to end their miserable lives. Thus resolved and desperate, they rushed in a body towards a neighboring pool, intending to drown themselves. On the bank were sitting a number of frogs, who, when they heard the noise of the hares as they ran, with one accord leaped into the water, hiding themselves in the depths. Then, one of the older hares, who was wiser than the rest, cried out to his companions, "Stop, my friends! Take heart! Don't let us destroy ourselves after all! See, here are creatures who are afraid of us, and who must, therefore, be still more timid than ourselves." As terrible as things might be, there is always someone worse off than ourselves.